Hi, my name is Charles Soule, and this is my secret origin at Comics Online.
Hi, I'm Ryan Browne. I make comic books, and this is my secret origin at Comics Online.
So it's Comics Online's 25th anniversary right
Okay.
now that we're celebrating, and we've been what we wanted to do was to highlight all the wonderful talent that works in the industry and talk
Mm.
about your origins. And we're doing Secret Origins as an ongoing series, so
Great.
talking about
Okay.
how you got into comics, your origin story. What was the first comic that you remember reading? So I just loved, because I think so many people ask the question of how to break in the industry. What was your story? Can we start there? Of how did you get into the world of comics?
Yeah, absolutely. So my obviously there's two origin stories here. One is how I became a reader of comics, and then the other is how I became a writer of comics. And um, the first one is probably not that dissimilar from a lot of people. My dad wanted me and my siblings to quiet down in the back seat of the car when we were driving somewhere. So he pulled over near like a drugstore, whatever it would have been at that time. I grew up in Michigan, and he went in, and because we were all kind of close in age, we were like, kids in the back seat squabbling, yelling at each other, whatever. And so he came out with comic books for all of us, and so that quieted us down immediately. Mine was an issue of Fantastic Four where they met the Asgardians for the first time, and so this I didn't remember what issue it was, and then I described it, and then this was back in the days when you could still use Twitter for fun things as opposed to just awful things. And so I posted that on Twitter, and Mark Waid almost instantly was like, "Oh, that's this issue," or it might have been Kurt Busiek, one of those two, luminaries who I'm happy to call friends now. So they identified it for me, whoever it was, and it was like Fantastic Four 248 or something like that. And it was I think pretty notably one of the first times that the Asgardians popped up in Marvel, which seems weird. I feel like they'd come in before, but there was something about it being an early appearance of those Norse god characters. So the story I don't really remember very much. I know it was a two-parter though, because the thing that happened when I finished reading the issue was I was like, it was a cliffhanger, as comics mostly end on. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't get the whole story. I have to come back. I have to do more. And so that introduced me to the concept of what comics were, what they could be. But then the one that really got me hooked in the idea of going back every week, every month, whatever, and trying to find the next issue was I was on my family used to go on vacation to Florida when we were for Christmas, maybe Easter, whatever, whenever the weather was too cold in Michigan, we'd go down there. And there was a grocery store that had a spinner rack of comics, and they had Secret Wars 2, number 4. Hey, Ryan.
Hi,
And
sorry.
so I grabbed Secret Wars 2, number 4, and I read it, and I was blown away by the incredible writing and story of Secret Wars 2, number 4. This is the stuff with the Beyonder and Spider-Man teaching him how to use the bathroom and all that thrilling stuff. But I realized that if I had issue 4, then that means issue 3, 2, and 1 were out there somewhere, issues 5, 6, 7, whatever. So that got me into the idea of like the hunt. And so then I was basically hooked. And it just kind of went from there. So that's my origin story of how I got into becoming a comics book reader, all the classics. So once I knew that I liked reading comics, and reading comics, I think for every comic reader is like a process. You start with the things that bring you in, but then over time your reading like matures, the way you think about comics, the way you start understanding that all the different things that they can do, and then just the things that interest you and you want to read as a reader, like the big technicolor superhero stuff was what grabbed me initially, and I think grabs a lot of young readers. But then over time you get into more sophisticated versions of the superhero concepts. People like Frank Miller, that was definitely a real, Bill Sienkiewicz, in terms of like the way that the art could be completely different than anything I'd ever seen before. So now we're getting into sort of more like college zone for me, and then from then on it was just I read everything I could, anything that caught my eye. So Garth Ennis, Alan Moore, you name it, a lot of those guys. In terms of becoming a comics writer, though, my origin story is, I think, pretty universal for most comic book creators. I went to law school. I think all of us can say that that's where they started. Um, I got out of law school and immediately realized that I had made a horrendous mistake. and it wasn't just like the pile of student loans that I was sitting on. It was that I'm a creative person. I love making things. I love writing things. I love telling stories. That's what I wanted to do with my life. And lawyers don't really get to do that in the way that creative people who make their living fully from creativity do. So I started immediately trying to write a novel. So this was, you know, I don't know, God, a long time ago at this point, like decades ago. The minute I finished passing the bar, I went and bought like a notebook, like a composition book at a stationery store, and started writing my first novel in that in longhand. I worked on that for about 3 or 4 years. It did not get picked up, which was a huge blow to me because I assumed that my first time at bat, of course, it's going to be the best novel of all time, and I will be given $1 million advance and never have to, do law again. Did not work out that way. I ended up working for another like 15 years as a lawyer. But in the meantime, I started thinking about, okay, you can spend 3 to 4 years writing a novel that you're really proud of, or you can put together a pitch for a graphic novel or a comic that takes much less time, and you can get an artist to draw 5 pages and like get a cover, and like the amount of time and effort to figure out if your idea is going to bear fruit was much less. And my time was limited because I was working full time as an attorney. So I thought that comics would just be like a better way in for me, an easier way in for me. Not that it's ever easy to become a creative person full time. But I started doing that. I started working on my first graphic novel, which ended up being called Strongman. That came out in 2009 from SLG, which is a small but very notable publisher that started the careers of a lot of really interesting creators. And I'm very proud that that book came out through them. And then you just sort of start climbing the ladder after that. You network, you figure things out, you figure out where the best fit for your voice is. You start making connections. And mostly the thing that I tell people when they ask this question is I just didn't stop, like I kept going, because eventually you become undeniable. Your drive, your desire, the body of work that you've created behind you, it becomes something that people know about. And when people know about your work, unless it's complete garbage, which can be a factor, eventually people will start wanting to work with you, starting to publish you, starting to put your voice into the world. So that's really the biggest thing. If you give up, if you stop, you will never be a comics creator. If you keep going, at least you have a shot.
That is a wonderful sentiment, and I appreciate you sharing your story. And Ryan, let's pivot to you for a minute, and let's hear, how did you find yourself working in the world of comics, and what do you remember about your entry point into comics in general?
Man, I wouldn't like I don't know how early to start. So I don't read very well. I have difficulty with reading, and so I always gravitated as a kid to comics to like get my storytelling and fix. And I remember as a child there was a book at the library that had no words in it, and it was just like it was a picture book with no words, and so I thought it was so amazing, and I would always check that book out. I have no idea what it's called, but I would, I would tell the story. I would read out loud to myself of that book when I was, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something. Like I thought that was more fun to like make up the story every time. And I'd read that book over and over again, and I had no idea what that book was. Um, and so from there, I just was, I always loved drawing. I always loved cartooning and doodling, and I kind of took the direction of, was very discouraged by art teachers to cartoon and doodle, and so I definitely focused on becoming a fine artist. That's what I went to art school for. Um, and like I wanted to be a painter. And so like my so much of my output art wise was all painting and drawing from life, and so the cartooning was like a thing that I did on the side. But I had a group of friends um in from middle school to high school that we all have become decently successful in like the creative space. Um uh but we are all into comic books together, and that got me more into comics when I was in high school. Um, my buddy Mike Costa, who I've known most of my life, we made comics together in high school, He's now, a television writer. He wrote and producer on Lucifer, and he wrote a ton of comics. We just did a Godzilla comic together for IDW. And my first ever like real published creator-owned work was with Mike Costa at IDW, book called Smoke and Mirrors from 2012. But yeah, we went to high school together, and my buddy Kevin Knipstein, who I've brought in, and he's now my color assistant. We also went to high school together. And then my good friend Adam is the lead dude of a band called Murder by Death. And so I've done a lot of stuff with him. And so, while he's been doing creative things, I've been doing my own creative things. There's a lot of parallels in those industries. And then the Cam from the Lucky Devils is my other close friend from that time period. He's a teacher. I mean, he's probably helping the world more than any of us. But so I put him the star of Lucky Devils. But we all fed off each other, and that got me into like actually making comics, and I would like reading comics. Um, and then when I went to college, I still wanted to be a painter, but there was an incredible library at the art school that was entirely donated by David Mazzucchelli. That was just incredible works, like indie stuff, stuff from Ross, his rubber blanket stuff, just tons and tons of stuff. And so that's when I really started reading a lot of comics, and Mazzucchelli taught at that school. And so I took a course with him and went through the whole thing, and I wanted to do more, so I got him to agree to do an independent study with me. And so but his entire thing was like, I remember you weren't allowed to take his course until you were at least a junior, because you needed to be able to communicate through drawing, and he wasn't going to teach you how to draw. And so uh I went to him sophomore year, and I was like, "Hi, David Mazzucchelli. I love year one. Um I really, really want to make comics. Like, can I take your course?" And he just was like, "No, you can't. See me in a year." And so then uh I I studied abroad for my junior year. And so then senior year I took his class, and then I asked to take it again. He's like, "Well, it's the same class." And I'm like, "Well, I could just, you know, be in the class again and then do my own stuff." So I did that. Um and so like that's where I really learned about storytelling, and I realized like, oh, like drawing strong people that shoot lasers and stuff is awesome, but it's this is an incredible medium for storytelling, because he would do these courses that were like the history of comics, and it was like, all right, here's like 20 years of comics from American history, and then he would do these lectures and stuff, and he'd show you all these weird stuff. There's just like, anytime I innovate in the comic that I'm doing, is I'm just copying something that I saw in one of those lectures, like, because it's all been done before. And I was like, wow, this is really fun, to just make stuff up. So then I stopped taking as many painting classes, and I started focusing on making comics. And um, I was in class with Paulo Rivera, who was my roommate, Joe Quinones, and R. Kikuo Johnson. We were all in the same class, and we did a senior show together. Um, and Paulo started working for Marvel our senior year, and he got Joe Quesada to come for our senior show, and I was like, "This is awesome!" And like, I've got these pictures of me with Joe Quesada my senior year, like at my art show, which was kind of fun. Is this too? Was this too long?
This is not too long. This is great.
Okay.
So,
One thing that occurs to me, Ryan, is that I also like spent a lot of time in Michigan growing up. And while I was not at Ryan's high school, like I have a lot of connections to the place that Ryan grew up. And so I wonder if we would be working together today if I wasn't like an honorary member of the Michigan Club.
Yeah, right.
Like we bonded over Michigan very
That's
early and
right.
still do.
Yeah,
So I think, that's, you only like Michigan things.
that's
That's it.
right.
That's all you care
Yeah.
about.
Oh, absolutely. And none
Yep.
of us live there anymore, but
Yep. Yep.